So Christmas. Happy Christmas, everyone. I hope you had a good one. You got everything you wanted. Christmas is a really insane kind of time. It's this frantic feeling of doing all the things and trying to conjure up the joy and the happiness and the togetherness. I recently asked my children what Christmas was all about, and one of them said the birth of Jesus, and the other said about family getting together. And, I thought about those two answers and how it covers the bases, right? We want our children to have a sense of family and have a sense of the importance of having a family that loves you and cares for you and gets together on special occasions and celebrates together and having that sense of belonging. And of course, we want our children to come to know Jesus in the way that my husband and I have through our lives. It's been a roller coaster lately, and it's always been a roller coaster. But there's definitely been some new lows for us, particularly in ministry in the church. But we haven't lost our sense of I haven't lost my sense of God and the Holy Spirit moving in the work of Jesus now here on earth. And I still want my children to have the sense of the Holy Spirit working in their lives. And part of that is telling the story of the church, the history of the church, and how we have evolved. People don't like using that word, but reformed. Reformed is a good, solid Christian word, and that we keep reforming. That's what the word means, is to form and then to form again. Reforming. It's important. It's important to keep looking at what we have and saying, have we allowed ourselves to slide into something that's less meaningful? Have we allowed this group of people that meet every Sunday for years, for decades, has this group of people lost the plot? Or lost their sense of harmony, lost their sense of meaning, lost their sense of outreach and meeting the needs of others. There's so many ways that we can kind of slide into complacency and lack of due diligence, right? So many ways. Any relationship you have can devolve into something else. And you look at yourselves and you say one day, how did we get here? Why are we like this? Sometimes it's not funny. It's sad and it's heartbreaking. That's not what I want to talk about. Talk about that with your therapist. What I want to talk about is Christmas. We all know A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. We all know the story, most of us. I'm sure I would love to know someone who doesn't know anything about A Christmas Carol. I'd love to talk to you. If you're someone who has no idea what I'm talking about, I would love to talk with you. Because it's everywhere, right? The story of Christmas Carol is everywhere. It's so prolific, right? I mean, there's so many versions. People who have no concept of anything else seem to know about the story of the Christmas Carol, which is just really, I mean, in itself, it's just interesting to me. So there's that, but then, I've been watching all these things because this year I have decided to try to dig deeper into things instead of just having some kind of surface knowledge of different things, and just trying to dig in a little bit more on one thing. And just there's so many things that can kind of grab your attention, right? And so I'm like, okay, focus. And so I've been looking up information about A Christmas Carol and about Charles Dickens. So, of course, I was for those who don't know, I was an English literature major in college. I have a bachelor's in English literature. I read so many books. I read all of, what's considered kind of the, white European canon, right? Starting with the Greeks and all of that. So Charles Dickens clearly was not new to me, and I read several of his novels, and yeah, so I knew where it was coming from. He was definitely someone who saw social reform as a necessary task in his times, and London in the 1800s did not seem like a very pleasant place for some people, for a lot of people, for the masses, right? The haves and the have-nots. I mean, gosh, the whole century was just rife with all kinds of things. As you may have heard, 1776, right? Like in America, and kind of so many of the things that have happened. I'm no historian, but when you look at revolutions and how they're paired with this general social angst, right? Like there's just this rising of the people. We're not going to take it anymore, and so you have these groups of people rising up. We're tired. We're done with lining the pockets of wealthy people. And so, how you have this Christmas Carol, which is, when you think about it in terms of the characters and how Dickens portrays them, he always has these layers of characters, where you have the pure in heart poor, right? You have the people who are, low, bottom of the rung social ladder, and then you have these corrupt, wicked, godless, wealthy people, and then you have everything in between. Because he has characters of wealthy, good-hearted, kind-hearted people who want to help, who do actually try to help poor people and help people in their circumstances. And so, you have this character of Scrooge who embodies all of the evil, cold-hearted people who only care about money. And that's the message that most of us got from that, from seeing it or reading it. It was always, Scrooge was a miser because he only cared about making more money and holding on to his money. Like, it wasn't even like he was spending his money. He was just taking it all and putting it in a safe, right? Just wanted to make more money. And it seemed like he just wanted to make people miserable. As miserable as he was, maybe. And it's this, character, just very one-sided character that we get to, in his older age, and he's bitter and cruel. Everybody hates him. And so trying to unpack, like, what makes someone become that person, right? That was Charles Dickens' story, is he's trying to kind of go backwards and do the IFS, and trying to, internal family systems. If you don't know, looking back into your childhood and your different coping mechanisms and trying to figure out like how you have become the person you are and how you live life the way you do and behave the way you do based on you know these messages that you give yourself to explain your life and to explain what's happening to you. And so Dickens creates this character that has a backstory, the origin backstory of this evil villain. And it's sad. I mean, it's sad. Now, some of the versions you can kind of say, well, he chose to be bitter. He chose to harden his heart. He chose to not care about people and just care about himself. He had opportunities to care for people and chose not to. There's all kinds of ways that you can see it from that angle. Now, I recently watched two things. One I came across was called The Man Who Invented Christmas. And it was about Charles Dickens writing this story. And he had to come up with it. He had already been a successful writer. People knew him. He had come to America and he had done speaking engagement. And, he was at the time, would be like a best-selling author, right? And so he was known. He established himself as a writer. So by the time he got to A Christmas Carol, he could do some different things. He was trying to write the next great story, and Christmas was not the deal that it is. And the irony for me, if I can skip ahead a couple hundred years, and I think I can say this, that Charles Dickens himself would be kind of appalled. Because the irony is that the tale he was telling, kicked off this frenzy about Christmas in a way that focused on the gift giving and focused on creating these, happy times for people, to and trying to live up to that expectation of what Christmas was going to be. And there's a couple of times within the text itself where Dickens is appealing to the people. Excuse me, that let's have Christmas all year. Like, let's keep that sentiment of being generous and being kind-hearted and caring for your fellow person all year round. Not just at Christmas, not trying to pack it all into one day, right? He says that a few times in his writing, by different characters. Even Scrooge himself talks about, why should we just do this for one day? Like when he's still a miser, he's still like complaining about all the joy and frivolousness of one day, which, that's the message of A Christmas Carol. And so that part of it's kind of been pushed aside a little bit to accommodate for this idea of making Christmas this big epic, we get this big epic scene at the end where Scrooge has become a new man and he's running all over town, frantically waking up shopkeepers. Like, I mean, there's just all this stuff. Like, let's just buy all the things. And because he's so wealthy, he can. He goes around town and buys everything and gives it away for free. And he, buys the prize turkey and gives it to this family who's starving. His worker, his employee, who can barely put food on the table for his family. Now, thankfully, Scrooge raises his wages. I mean, we don't know if it's a living wage. Probably it was good for London at the time. And he cancels debts for all these people that owe him a lot of money. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful story, right? That's why we love it so much. And so that this show, this movie, The Man Who Invented Christmas, has a really interesting angle on it, trying to depict Charles Dickens' life and his backstory, right? I won't spoil it for you if you haven't seen it and want to see it, but it has a couple of very interesting storylines. I did a little research. Most of it's true. Some of it's a little, literary license. But it's good. I recommend the movie. It's very, it's well done, and it gives some more context to what I'm saying about Christmas Carol and how, and the real messages that Dickens is trying to portray in a time when, the wealthy and the poor, there's such a huge gap between them. And then the other, it was a series, it was a mini series, short run, like the 3-part mini series on FX. And, it's called A Christmas Carol, but I do not recommend it for kids or anyone who's, uncomfortable with the subject matter, because that version goes deep and dark, very dark. My husband and I watched it, and it was disturbing. Now, some people might, I've read some critiques and people talking about it, and they said that it was, um, that Dickens himself wouldn't have liked it and so on. I think personally that Dickens would have loved it. I think that he would have said that this is, in modern times, like if he were a writer today, he would have maybe written the story that way. Because when you look through the source material of what he wrote, and not just Christmas Carol, but you read through some of his other novels, his other stories, there's lots of darkness in there that we tend to kind of gloss over, if we read it today, whether it's euphemisms or just, kind of vague depictions of things like, human trafficking and prostitution and drug use. And, there's all kinds of references to things that happened, in, London 1800s. But, for Dickens himself, I think he was bringing to light the seedy part of London life, and bringing it before the more elite classes of people, and saying this is how the other half live, right? And so I tend to think that Dickens would actually say, yeah, this is a good modern telling of this story, because it goes dark. I mean, there are things in it. Again, no spoilers, but there are aspects of the plot for Scrooge that are kind of glossed over in the kind of Disney-fied versions. I mean, it's similar to Disney-fied Grimm's brothers tales, like the Grimm brothers wrote these stories that are pretty horrific. I mean, there's some really awful things in there that don't quite make it into the animated version at Disney, right? And so, that our versions of Christmas Carol, or Muppets Christmas Carol, is gonna. Don't get me wrong, I love Muppets Christmas Carol, but it's not gonna go there because that's not who it's for. That's not the audience. But this version, the one on FX with Guy Pearce and Andy Serkis is in there. He's fantastic as always. There's a great cast. Originally, I read that it was produced by Tom Hardy's production company, and originally I read that Tom Hardy was supposed to be in it as a Scrooge, but I guess scheduling or something, and he wasn't, which would have been really interesting because I love Tom Hardy. And so does my husband. So it ended up being Guy Pearce, and he's great too. and he did a fantastic job. And it was thought provoking. I mean, if you think you're tired of Christmas Carol and seeing it in all its many, many versions, this one's different. This one's very, very different. It doesn't have almost any of the same plot. I mean, the general plot is the same. There was a point at which I said to my husband, like, I wonder if this version is even going to end up the same way. Like, I wonder if they're going to just reboot the Christmas Carol and just make it like he doesn't change. Like, it was that kind of story. And so yeah, it was interesting. And so I would recommend it to anyone, who's interested in that kind of thing and wants a different take on it, and maybe a more modern telling of a complex story. Because the truth is, the story is complex and like is as simplified as we want to make it. Looking back through your life and looking at different scenes in your life that made you who you are, and I say that with air quotes because all of it kind of adds up. I mean, there's definitely moments in life that contribute to who you are, and the choices that you made, the choices that other people made for you, definitely sent you in a certain direction. I think, and while we can make different choices now, there's definitely, a well-trod path that's been formed in your mind. And this is the work of trauma, right? Like when you've had an experience that has caused your brain to make this path to I would say to a certain message that you tell yourself. Like, I'm not good enough, or I always do the wrong thing, or I never know what to say, right? Those are messages that you put in your head that you just keep repeating to yourself in those circumstances where you feel trapped or you feel at a loss or whatever. And then you do the same thing that you have always done. Your brain goes the same way that it's always gone. And your body like tenses up, or your body does the same things it's always done. And the work of trauma is getting over that, changing that pattern, saying, that's not what I'm going to do anymore. I'm going to do something different. Anyway, all that to say that, in those moments when we get to see Scrooge have these responses to these things that have happened to him that have caused some message, some, trauma response that contributes to who he is as we first encounter him in the story, it makes sense. Like, why wouldn't you become a cold-hearted, bitter person? Why wouldn't you become this person who hates people and who just doesn't want to trust anybody, doesn't want to care about anybody, doesn't want to interact, minimal interactions with people. And it becomes clearer and clearer. Like, it takes us as humanity a lot to love and care for each other after all the things that have happened to us, and collectively and individually. And here's the thing that I was thinking about a lot. A lot of people don't have those experiences. They don't have the kind of traumatic incidents in their lives that they can point to and say, here's a place where something horrible happened to me personally, that changed my life, changed the course of my life. There are people who don't have those incidents that they can put their finger on. And so they may not have the understanding, the depth of understanding that they need to truly empathize. Maybe that's what it is. They can't have empathy. It can only, no, sorry, it can only be empathy. It can only be like, I'm going to try to embody this other experience that I've never had. Like, if you try to explain to someone what it feels like to ride a roller coaster, right? And that person's never been on a roller coaster before, and you try to explain to them, can they feel it? Can they feel the, the pit in their stomach? Can they feel, all the things? Like, maybe, I mean, if they're an empathetic person, they can. But it's not the same as someone who's actually been on a roller coaster and they know exactly what you're talking about. And so, that person's going to get to where you're at a lot faster than someone who's never had your experiences. And so back to, Christmas. Christmas is, Dickens' story was trying to put Christmas in its place. And that Christmas is this experience where everybody is kind of forced. I mean, if Scrooge was telling it, everyone's forced to be joyful, and everybody's forced to care about each other, and everybody's thrown together, and you have to make nice with everyone. But for the good of your community, right? And Charles Dickens was really trying to say, let's take that feeling of, like, let's be good to each other one day a year, to let's be good to each other every day, all year. And let's take that same spirit of giving and generosity throughout the year. Let's not just care about, Tiny Tim one day a year. Let's actually help him. The healthcare aspect of 1800 London really hit me a new way this year. Yeah, I don't think I want to go there, but our current economy and the way that we deal with healthcare needs to change, and we need a whole lot of Scrooges to come to Jesus. And there's that. That's all I'll say about that. But this story of Christmas Carol and the way that Dickens would have wanted it to be told would be less of this, let's create this frenzy for all of December and trying to create this magical experience for one day, or for one season, because we can't possibly get it all in one day, but we can, extend it to a 1 month period of absolute crazy town. And don't get me wrong. I mean, I go to Christmas Town at Busch Gardens. I love it. I love it. I love the lights. I love the happiness. And that's the thing. Like, I love watching people just be happy. I love people watching, and, sitting and watching people just being joyful, being together, being a family, enjoying music together, dancing, laughing, eating good food. I mean, all of it. It's beautiful. It's what we're made to do, and I love it. So don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to cancel Christmas, and Charles Dickens certainly was not trying to cancel Christmas. He was trying to cancel this sense of greed, the way that, one author, and I'll try to put the link to the article in the blog, but one author said, one reviewer talked about how it actually, Christmas Carol kind of kicked off this a whole new industry of creating Christmas, right? Like, the story itself is about, all these ways that we celebrate Christmas, eating good food and buying all these toys and the trees and all the things, and created this whole segment of the market. Like, oh, we can sell Christmas now and make a lot of money off of it. So it almost created more Scrooges, right? Like it created entire corporations that are just based on Christmas sales. And I'm not sure how Dickens would have felt about that. I mean, we certainly are happy when it creates jobs and spreads the wealth for others, for the working class. But who makes the most money off of it is always the question. I mean, that's one of the themes of Christmas Carol, is that who made the most money off of Scrooge and Marley, right? Scrooge and Marley. Anyway, I'm not a historian and I'm not an economist, but I would venture to say that the amount of money that people spend in December is enough for the whole year, probably. I mean, a lot of people. Anyway, I wanted to wrap this up quickly with just this thought that I had the other day about, understanding Scrooge, the villain. If we want to have that, dichotomy thinking of who's the antagonist, who's the protagonist, right? And who is the protagonist? It's Scrooge. It's Scrooge and Scrooge. And so, how do we treat a story about a villain, and how do we create some empathy for the villain in order to tell the story well and fairly? Because there are no Disney characters. It's not, we don't live in a Disney tale. There's no cut and dry characters, which in modern times we're much more willing to accept that than I think we've ever been in the history of fiction, right? And I think that that's not a bad thing. Some people, there are groups of people that want to make that a bad thing, like villains should be villains. Well, I'm not sure that that's serving us well. I'm not sure that that's helping society understand what creates a villain, and what creates a hero, or how we perceive heroes. The talk about Wicked, the movie, which has been a big hit. It resonates with a lot of people. A lot of people are seeing it for the first time because they didn't read the book and they couldn't afford to go to the Broadway show. And so they're seeing it for the first time, and it's stunning people, as it should. I mean, it's a good story. It's a good story. It's well written, and it's just fun. It's just a fun story. But it is creating a new sense of what does it mean, which is the original author's purpose. The person who wrote Wicked, the book, the novel, certainly I've read some interviews, and that author absolutely says one of the questions being asked is, what makes someone wicked? Like, why do we call her the Wicked Witch of the West? Like, how did she get that title? Did she give it to herself? Like, is she saying, I am the Wicked Witch of the West? Or is she just kind of going with it? She's embracing it because that's what she's been told she is. So it's a fascinating story, and well worth considering this idea of what creates a villain, and how do we as a society agree? Do we agree on who the villain is, and how do we as a society treat that villain, and how do we interact with the villain of the story, and how do we redeem the villain? Is it possible to redeem the villain? And is it possible that it's not the villain who needs to be redeemed? in Charles Dickens certainly had much more of a cut and dry, black and white contrast in his characters. We knew who we were supposed to be rooting for, and we knew who was supposed to not, people who need their comeuppance. Scrooge is certainly one of those characters. Like we're not supposed to root for Scrooge, and we're not supposed to root for characters like Bill Sykes or Fagin and Oliver Twist and all these other characters that he's come up with. But there are certainly stories where the hero, the protagonist of the story is flawed, and there's questions. We have questions about these people, and that's okay. It's okay to have that sense of, I'm not really sure what to make of these characters, because human beings are complex. There are a lot of things in our backstories that create, or didn't create, but probably provoked us a certain way. And so in Christmas season, and as we enter a new calendar year, I'm just compelled by these stories and the stories of our history as a country here in America, our history of how we've come to be who we are, and then church history and the American church, the American evangelical church, and how we've gotten to where we are, and trying to understand who, we want to make these columns of who are our heroes and who are our villains. And I'm not sure that they're columns. They're kind of wobbly lines. Because we're all in this boat together. We're all rowing in different directions. We all want to make things, these epic things that change the world. But sometimes I think it's more of, let's get Tiny Tim healthcare. Let's put some food on the table of the Cratchit family so they don't have to share a chicken wing for dinner. And I think that's the work of the church. I think that's the work of the true church, capital C, as well as the local church, lowercase c, wherever you're at, walking into the new year and saying, how do we keep the spirit of Christmas all year? Happy New Year.